Hi, so I'm Rob Vincent with MIT Sea Grant, and I'm going to just give you just a really quick overview of two habitats that I've been working in with a bunch of people that I'll mention at the end that are outside of salt marshes here in the Northeast. Okay, so the first one is Cedar Swamps on Cape Cod. So this is sort of a climate impact issue as well. So at Coast Guard Beach, in the top left, you can see some carbon deposits, peat deposits that have been exposed from wave erosion. So with increased intensity and frequency of storms due to climate change, we're getting a lot of coastal erosion along the Cape, and we're getting some of these peat deposits being exposed. So that's an old cedar swamp. And so I'm comparing that with an existing cedar swamp just up the road at Marconi. This is a coastal habitat, a wetland habitat. It occurs on the coast. It's, as Kevin noted, influenced by sea level rise. It's groundwater driven. So as sea level rise influences the salt lens, it's going to influence the freshwater winds and the groundwater associated with this. So we just sampled the greenhouse gas emissions, carbon storage, and then we wanted to look at some of the processes that may be driving or underlying factors that are driving the processes. So nutrients, looking at stable isotopes and CN ratios, and the microbial communities. And I'll also say that we also build into this outreach and educational opportunities. So when you work on a beach in Cape Cod in the middle of the summer, you get a lot of interested people. So it's a great opportunity to interact with people, increase awareness, explain what's going on and how people investigate it. And we also support interns with this program, a number of them from around the country. We've had students. And I also work with the National Park Service in spring and fall. They work with Nauset High School, and I do a carbon cycling component and climate impacts component to their program, and we go and talk about this research that we're doing here. And the other site is the Cranberry Bog Restoration. Again, the hydrologic connection to the marine environment is it's upstream, and eventually with sea level rise, it gives that opportunity as a salt wedge moves for those coastal habitats to migrate upstream. So we're looking again at the same components and comparing that to a freshwater natural wetland as our control. And as it turns out, you can see down here, so this is the core, and you can see here's the impacted layers from the Cranberry Bog operations. It turns out our natural wetland looks like it was once a Cranberry Bog operation that was abandoned, and we have a natural succession to a natural wetland in there. So that gives us a point in time to compare it to as well. So that's a nice little find there. So, we also did some of sampling in the water as well with floating chambers. So again, supporting students, and then they have groups come through. And this is part of Tidmarsh Farms, and also now Audubon owns this property. So what did we find? We found higher, so the slides up on the top, we found higher carbon at the reference sites than in the impacted layers, which is what I showed you in the core. Higher bulk density at impacted sites in the impacted layers, which is to be expected. And then higher greenhouse gas emissions at the Cedar Swamp than the reference site at the dunes, decreased CO2 and increased methane at the Cranberry Bog, and then overall lower CO2 and higher methane at the natural wetland sites. I don't think I have time to, well, maybe quick. So, and then you can see all the way to the right, that's a gradient, soil moisture gradient showing decrease in CO2 and increase in methane at the Cranberry Bog, but overall lower CO2 and higher methane at the natural sites. And then we did some microbial analysis looking at the denitrifying communities and differences there. And we found that in the Cedar Swamps sites in the dune, that source is wrong. But we found much higher denitrifying microbial activity in the natural site than in the impacted coastal dune site. So these are things this is just very preliminary. We're going to be looking at this stuff in more detail as we go on.
Thank you. Thanks, Rob.
Good.